"Look at me, not him," Valerie hissed, his grip tightening enough to bruise. Hundreds of New York's elite watched in dead silence as the city's most dangerous crime lord staked his claim. Palmer, a size 20 assistant who only wanted a quiet life, realized she was trapped in a lethal game. Palmer Hayes knew she didn't fit the aesthetic of Romano Enterprises. Located on the 42nd floor of a sleek glass high-rise in the financial district, the corporate headquarters was a parade of razor-sharp suits, designer stilettos, and waistlines that rarely exceeded a size 4. Palmer, by stark contrast, was undeniably fat. She was a solid size 20, with a soft, heavy stomach, thick thighs, and full arms. She didn't have the hourglass illusion that magazines praised. She took up space, and in the ruthless corporate world of Manhattan, taking up space was usually an unforgivable sin. Yet for the past 3 years, Palmer had been the executive assistant to Valerie Romano, the CEO of Romano Enterprises. What the public knew about Valerie was that he was 34, possessed a ruthlessly brilliant mind for real estate acquisitions, and had a net worth that eclipsed small countries. What the public whispered, and what the federal government had spent decades trying to prove, was that the Romanos were the modern evolution of the Cosa Nostra. They didn't break kneecaps in back alleys anymore. They bought city councilmen and laundered billions through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Palmer tried to ignore the whispers. She focused on his schedule, his meetings at Wospo, and his perfectly black coffee. She told herself that the sudden disappearance of a union leader who opposed Valerie's Hell's Kitchen development was just a coincidence. She had to. The alternative was admitting that the man who paid her exorbitant salary fully covered her mother's expensive dialysis treatments at Mount Sinai Hospital and sent a private black Cadillac Escalade to her Brooklyn apartment every morning was a monster. Valerie's control over her life had been a slow, insidious creep. It started with the car. "The subway isn't safe at your hours, Palmer. Use the driver." Then it was her meals. When he noticed she was skipping lunch to finish quarterly reports, a standing order was placed at Del Frisco's Double Eagle Steakhouse. Every day at 1 o'clock, a heavy, expensive meal was delivered directly to her desk. He never commented on her weight, never made her feel lesser for it. In fact, his dark, obsidian eyes tracked her every movement with a suffocating, heavy intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the delicate bubble of Palmer's willful ignorance began to crack. The office was quiet, the hum of the central air conditioning the only sound. Valerie was in a closed-door meeting with Arthur Penhaligon, a real estate developer. Palmer was at her desk, organizing a notoriously complex offshore dossier, when the private elevator chimed. The man who stepped out was like a walking thunderstorm. He had sharp, aristocratic features, slicked-back blonde hair, and wore a custom Brioni suit that screamed old, dangerous money. He didn't look like a corporate executive. He looked like a predator. "I'm here to see Valerie," the man said, leaning against Palmer's desk. His eyes, a pale, icy blue, raked over her. Most men in this building looked right through Palmer. This man looked at her as if she were the main course at a banquet. "Do you have an appointment, mister?" Palmer asked, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden spike in her heart rate. Gabriel Rossi," he said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "And no, I don't need an appointment. Valerie and I are old friends." Palmer recognized the name instantly. The Rossi syndicate controlled the ports in New Jersey. They were the Romanos' biggest rivals. A turf war between them had been brewing for months, supposedly the cause of a triple homicide down by the docks just 2 weeks prior. Mr. Romano is in a meeting, Palmer said, her fingers tightening around her Mont Blanc pen. I'll have to ask you to wait in the reception lounge. Gabriel didn't move. Instead, he reached out, his knuckles brushing lightly against the plump curve of Palmer's cheek. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. You're not his usual type, Gabriel murmured, his voice a low, gravelly purr. He usually goes for the hungry, hollow-cheeked socialites. But you're beautiful, soft, real. A man could drown in all of this and die happy. Don't touch her. The voice cracked through the lobby like a gunshot. Valerie stood in the doorway of his office, the heavy oak door completely open. The real estate developer, Arthur, was cowering behind him, clutching his briefcase. Valerie's face was completely devoid of emotion, but his eyes were black pits of pure, unfiltered rage. The tension in the room plummeted to sub-zero temperatures. Gabriel pulled his hand back, raising both palms in a mocking gesture of surrender. Relax, Vince. Just introducing myself to your lovely assistant. Get out, Valerie commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, which made it infinitely more terrifying. We have business to discuss regarding the Hudson Yards expansion. Gabriel pushed, dropping the smile. My business with you is done. If you ever come up this elevator again, if you ever look at her again, I will have you gutted and hung from the Brooklyn Bridge. Now get out. Gabriel's jaw ticked. He looked at Valerie, then back at Palmer, offering her a dark, knowing wink before turning on his heel and stepping back into the elevator. Palmer sat frozen, her chest heaving. Valerie didn't move until the elevator doors closed. Then he dismissed Arthur with a sharp flick of his wrist. Once they were alone, Valerie crossed the room in 3 long strides. He stopped directly in front of her desk, his massive frame towering over her. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping the exact spot on her cheek where Gabriel had touched her. His thumb brushed over her skin, pressing hard, as if trying to erase the other man's fingerprints. Did he hurt you? Valerie asked, his voice rough, entirely different from the cold tone he used with Gabriel. No, Palmer whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Valerie, what is going on? Why is Gabriel Rossi here? Nothing you need to worry your head about, Palmer, he murmured, his thumb trailing down to her jaw. You are mine to protect. Do you understand? No one touches what is mine. The possessiveness in his words sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a corporate protection. It was primal, obsessive. She was trapped in the gravity of a monster, and for the first time, she realized she had no idea how to escape. The annual New York Philanthropic Gala at Cipriani Wall Street was a monolithic labyrinth of towering marble columns and vaulted ceilings. It was a gilded battleground where billionaires, corrupt politicians, and the city's underground elite mingled under the thin veil of charity. Palmer Hayes had no business being here. Her domain was the spreadsheets and schedules of the 42nd floor, not the glittering viper pit of Manhattan's high society. Yet 3 days before the gala, Valerie had summoned her. A seamstress from Milan had been waiting in his office. You're attending with me, Valerie had declared, a command disguised as a statement. I need someone I can trust by my side. Now, hiding near a towering ice sculpture, Palmer felt entirely out of her depth. The midnight blue silk gown Valerie had commissioned didn't attempt to camouflage her size 20 frame. Instead, it weaponized her figure. The corset cinched tightly at her waist before the heavy silk flowed over her wide hips and thick thighs, while the daring sweetheart neckline pushed up her heavy breasts and left her shoulders completely bare. She had never felt so exposed, but judging by the heated, hungry stares tracking her every move, she had never looked so magnetic. Valerie had been a looming shadow all night. His proprietary hand rested firmly on the small of her back, his thumb occasionally stroking her bare skin. Whenever a man's gaze lingered on Palmer's curves for a fraction of a second too long, Valerie's grip would tighten, his sheer, terrifying presence forcing the offender to quickly look away. But his control couldn't pause his empire forever. Senator Thomas Bradley, crucial for the dock zoning permits, cornered Valerie near the VYP lounges. "Stay right here," Valerie ordered, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with a possessive weight. "Do not move. I will be back in 3 minutes." Palmer nodded, sipping her sparkling water, desperate for a moment to breathe. The opulence was suffocating. "Midnight blue is definitely your color, Palmer," she gasped, spinning around. Gabriel Rossi leaned against the marble pillar behind her, swirling a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. Dressed in a black velvet tuxedo, he looked aristocratic and devastatingly handsome, but his pale blue eyes held the same predatory glint she remembered. "Mr. Rossi," Palmer said, taking a step back, her heart hammering. "You shouldn't be talking to me." "Why? Because Valerie said so?" Gabriel chuckled, stepping closer. The brassy jazz band masked their conversation from the glittering crowd. "Valerie doesn't own the world. He's a warden. He keeps you isolated and dependent, a plush little bird in a gilded cage. You think it's a coincidence he pays your mother's Mount Sinai hospital bills? He bought your loyalty. He bought you." Palmer's stomach plummeted. The medical payments were entirely off the books, handled by a private trust. "You're lying," she whispered, her hands shaking violently. "I run an intelligence network that rivals the CIA, darling," Gabriel purred, closing the distance until the scent of sandalwood and gin enveloped her. "Valerie is dangerously obsessed. He drove away your ex-boyfriend, David. He threatened him with violence until he broke it off and fled the city." Her mind reeled. David's abrupt departure 8 months ago, packing overnight, refusing her calls, claiming it was a matter of life and death. Had Valerie orchestrated it all? "A war is coming," Gabriel continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "When I take Valerie down, I don't want you in the crossfire. Leave him. Come with me. My family can protect you, and I would treat those beautiful thick curves with the absolute worship they deserve." He reached out, his fingers wrapping gently around her bare forearm. Before Palmer could pull away, the room's atmosphere violently ruptured. The oxygen was sucked from the space. Gabriel's grip was abruptly severed as a massive hand clamped around his throat. Palmer screamed. Valerie had materialized out of nowhere, his face a chilling mask of demonic fury. He slammed Gabriel backward against the marble column with enough force to shatter the crystal tumbler on the floor. The jazz band stopped dead. 500 elites fell into a terrified, breathless silence. Valerie lifted the rival syndicate boss entirely off the floor by his neck. 6 of Valerie's heavily armed guards instantly formed a perimeter, pushing back the panicked socialites. "I warned you," Valerie snarled, his voice echoing in the cavernous hall. It wasn't the polished tone of a CEO. It was the raw, violent growl of a cartel kingpin. "I told you what would happen if you touched what is mine." "Valerie, stop!" Palmer cried, sheer terror gripping her chest. She grabbed his bicep. It felt like grabbing a steel beam. "You're going to kill him here, in front of everyone. Please." At her touch, Valerie's rigid posture shifted slightly. He didn't release Gabriel, but he turned his head. His dilated eyes were walled, consumed by a feral possessiveness that chilled her to the bone. Gabriel gasped, his face crimson, his eyes rolling toward Palmer in a silent plea. Valerie's jaw clenched. He dropped Gabriel, letting the man collapse to the marble in a gasping heap. Instantly, Valerie grabbed Palmer by her heavy waist, yanking her flush against his hard chest. His large hand moved up, gripping her jaw with a bruising, inescapable force, forcing her to look into his wrathful eyes. "Look at me." "Not at him," Valerie hissed, his grip tightening. Hundreds of New York's elite watched in dead silence as the city's most dangerous crime lord staked his absolute claim. Palmer, a size 20 assistant who only wanted a quiet life, realized the horrifying truth of her reality. "You don't look at another man," Valerie commanded, his breath hot against her trembling lips. "You don't entertain their lies. You belong to me, Palmer, not the company. Me." Tears spilled over her lashes. The veil was fully lifted. He had just declared to the entire criminal underworld that she was his greatest weakness and his most guarded possession. "Take her to the car," Valerie barked to his men, keeping his arm firmly around her waist. As they were escorted through the parted crowd, Palmer looked back. Gabriel was standing, brushing off his tuxedo, a sick smile on his bleeding lips. He mouthed 2 words. Tick-tock. The war had begun, and she was the prize. The black Cadillac Escalade tore through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, running 3 red lights before merging onto the George Washington Bridge. Inside the heavily armored vehicle, the silence was suffocating. Palmer sat pressed against the leather door, wrapping her arms around her heavy waist, shivering despite the blast of the heater. Valerie sat beside her, radiating a terrifying, kinetic energy. He had loosened his bow tie and unbuttoned the collar of his tuxedo shirt, exposing the thick, tattooed column of his neck. He was staring blindly out the window, his chest rising and falling with harsh, uneven breaths. "Tuxedo Park," Valerie barked to his driver, Dominic. "Activate the perimeter lockdown on the estate. Call in the night shift. We are at war." Palmer's breath hitched. Tuxedo Park was an ultra-exclusive, historic, gated village in Orange County, nestled deep in the Ramapo Mountains. She knew Valerie owned a sprawling stone mansion there, perched right on the edge of Tuxedo Lake, but it was supposed to be a corporate retreat, not a military bunker. "Valerie," Palmer whispered, her voice cracking. "What did you do? Why did you attack him?" He turned his head slowly. The feral, predatory look in his eyes had not faded. "I established boundaries, Palmer. Gabriel forgot his place." "He said you drove David away," she blurted out, unable to hold the poison in any longer. The plush midnight blue silk of her dress rustled as she shifted, her thick thighs trembling. "He said you threatened him. And my mother. The Mount Sinai bills. Gabriel said you bought me." Valerie's jaw tightened. He shifted across the spacious cabin, closing the distance between them until his knees bracketed her wide hips. He reached out, his massive hands gripping her soft, bare shoulders, pulling her away from the door and into his space. "David was a degenerate," Valerie snarled softly, his dark eyes boring into hers. "He had $50,000 in illegal gambling debts with the Russian syndicates in Brighton Beach. They were going to use you to get to him. I paid his debts, gave him a one-way ticket to Seattle, and told him if he ever contacted you again, I would mail him back to you in pieces." Palmer gasped, tears spilling over her lashes. You had no right. You took my choices away. I took the danger away, Valerie roared, the sound vibrating in the confined space of the SUV. He immediately softened his grip, his thumbs rubbing soothing circles over her collarbones. You are too trusting, Palmer. Too good. You think men look at you and see a sweet assistant. They don't. They see a target. His gaze dropped to her heavy breasts, then down to the soft, thick curve of her stomach. You are beautiful. Lush. You are everything those starved, hollow women in my world are not. Gabriel only wants you because he knows you are my heart. He knows you are the only thing in this miserable world that I actually care about. The confession hung in the air, heavy and inescapable. He loved her. Not as a boss, not as a friend, but with the consuming, toxic obsession of a cartel kingpin. He had built a fortress around her, isolating her from anyone who wasn't him. An hour later, the Escalade passed through the heavy wrought-iron gates of the Tuxedo Park estate. The massive Gothic stone mansion loomed in the darkness, surrounded by dense, ancient forests. Armed men in tactical gear were already patrolling the gravel driveway. Valerie escorted her inside, leading her up a grand, sweeping staircase to the master suite. The room was a cavern of dark mahogany, rich velvet, and bulletproof glass overlooking the black waters of the lake. You will stay here, Valerie ordered, stripping off his suit jacket to reveal a holstered Sig Sauer P226 strapped to his chest. Do not go near the windows. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Where are you going? Palmer asked, fear suddenly overriding her anger. The reality of Gabriel's parting words, tick-tock, echoed in her mind. I have to coordinate a strike on Gabriel's ports, Valerie said coldly. He insulted me in public. He touched you. By sunrise, the Rossi Syndicate will cease to exist. He stepped forward, cupping her face and pressing a hard, desperate kiss to her forehead. Before she could speak, he was gone, the heavy oak door locking from the outside with a resounding click. Palmer paced the massive rug, her mind racing. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, just as Gabriel had said. But as she touched her forehead, where Valerie's lips had lingered, a dark, confusing realization washed over her. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, taking up space didn't make her a burden. It made her a queen in the eyes of a monster. At 2 a.m., the perimeter alarms began to scream. The piercing wail shattered the silence of the mansion. Suddenly, the staccato pop of automatic gunfire echoed from the lower levels. Palmer screamed, dropping to the floor and covering her ears. The door to the master suite burst open. Valerie charged in, his white shirt stained with blood that wasn't his. We have to go, now! What's happening? She cried, struggling to her feet, the heavy silk dress tangling around her thick legs. Gabriel sent a hit squad. They bypassed the outer gates using a local police frequency, Valerie said, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward a massive bookcase. He yanked a hidden lever, and the bookcase swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow stone passageway. Move, Palmer! Go! The secret passage reeked of damp earth and old stone. Valerie pushed her ahead of him, holding a tactical flashlight in one hand and his gun in the other. Palmer's breath tore through her lungs, her heavy chest heaving with exertion. She wasn't built for running, and the tight corset of her dress dug painfully into her ribs, but the sound of shouting and heavy boots echoing from above forced her to push past the pain. They emerged into the freezing night air, through a rusted iron door, disguised in the hillside. They were at the edge of Tuxedo Lake, near a wooden boathouse where a high-speed watercraft was docked. Get in the boat, Valerie commanded, pushing her toward the dock. Suddenly, a blinding spotlight snapped on, pinning them in a harsh halo of white light. "Not another step, Vince!" Gabriel Rossi stepped out from the shadows of the boathouse. He was no longer wearing his tuxedo. He wore a dark, tactical vest, and he was holding an assault rifle pointed directly at Palmer's chest. 4 heavily armed mercenaries flanked him, their laser sights painting bright red dots across Valerie's body. "It's over," Gabriel sneered, a wicked, triumphant smile twisting his aristocratic features. "My men have secured the estate. Your guards are dead or dying. Drop the gun, or I blow a hole through your beautiful, plump little assistant." Valerie froze. The Mafia Don, a man who had ruthlessly ordered the executions of dozens, looked at the red laser dot resting on the center of Palmer's chest. For the first time, Palmer saw genuine, unfiltered terror in Valerie's obsidian eyes. "Let her go, Gabriel," Valerie said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "She is a civilian. She has nothing to do with our business." "She has everything to do with it," Gabriel laughed, stepping closer. "She is your weakness. The great Valerie Romano, brought to his knees by a plus-sized secretary. I want the deeds to the Hudson Yards, and I want full control of the New Jersey ports. Sign them over, and I'll let her live." "No!" Palmer screamed, taking a step toward Gabriel. "Don't do it, Valerie." "Shut up!" Gabriel barked, marching forward and grabbing Palmer by her hair. He yanked her backward, pressing the hot barrel of his rifle against her temple. Palmer whimpered, the cold steel sending a shock wave of terror through her body. She was pressed flush against Gabriel's chest. "Drop the weapon, Vince," Gabriel hissed into Palmer's ear, "or I paint this dock with her brains." Valerie didn't hesitate. He opened his hand, letting his Sig Sauer clatter onto the wooden planks. He raised his hands in the air. "I'll give you whatever you want. The ports, the real estate. Just take the gun off her." Gabriel laughed, a cold, empty sound. "You're pathetic. I'll take the Empire, Vince. But I'm taking your life, too. And as for the girl, maybe I'll keep her around for a few weeks before I dispose of her." Gabriel shifted his grip on the rifle, moving the barrel away from Palmer's head to aim it squarely at Valerie's heart. His finger curled around the trigger. He's going to kill him, Palmer realized, a sudden, blinding panic seizing her brain. He's going to kill Valerie, and then he's going to kill me. Adrenaline, sharp and violently primal, flooded Palmer's veins. She didn't think. She acted. Gabriel was expecting her to cower. He wasn't expecting 240 pounds of solid weight to suddenly turn into a weapon. Palmer threw her head back, smashing her skull directly into Gabriel's face. She heard a sickening crunch as his nose shattered. As Gabriel howled in pain and stumbled backward, Palmer didn't run away. Instead, she threw her entire body weight backward, slamming her heavy hips and shoulders directly into Gabriel's center of mass. The sheer force of her weight caught the rival boss completely off balance. His boots slipped on the wet, mossy wood of the dock. Gabriel tumbled backward, dropping the rifle as he hit the planks with a bone-rattling thud, Palmer falling heavily on top of his legs, pinning him down. "Valerie, now!" Palmer screamed, rolling off Gabriel's thrashing legs. Valerie moved with the speed of a striking viper. He dove across the dock, snatching his discarded gun from the planks. Before the 4 mercenaries could even adjust their aim, Valerie fired 4 consecutive, deafening shots. Bang, 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 bang. All 4 men dropped instantly, clean shots to the head. Gabriel coughed on his own blood, scrambling frantically toward his dropped rifle. But a heavy, expensive leather shoe slammed down onto his wrist, shattering the bones. Valerie towered over Gabriel, the muzzle of his gun pressed directly between Gabriel's icy blue eyes. "You should have stayed in New Jersey," Valerie whispered. He pulled to the trigger. The noise was deafening. Palmer squeezed her eyes shut, turning her head away as the wet, horrific sound of the impact echoed across the silent lake. When she finally opened her eyes, the dock was eerily quiet, save for the gentle lapping of the water against the wood. Valerie stood over Gabriel's lifeless body, his chest heaving, the gun lowering slowly to his side. He turned to look at Palmer. She was kneeling on the wet dock, her beautiful midnight blue silk dress torn and stained with mud, her thick dark hair plastered to her face. She was trembling violently. Valerie dropped his gun. He fell to his knees in front of her, wrapping his massive arms tightly around her heavy body, burying his face in the soft crook of her neck. He was shaking just as hard as she was. "You saved me," Valerie breathed, his voice raw, pressing desperate kisses to her jaw, her neck, her shoulder. "My beautiful, brave girl, you saved me." Palmer clutched at the bloody fabric of his shirt. She looked at the bodies on the dock, the blood seeping into the lake, and the monster holding her like she was his only salvation. She knew, in that exact moment, that she was never going back to her quiet Brooklyn apartment. She was never going back to being an invisible, oversized girl on the subway. She had crossed the threshold. She belonged to the underworld now. "Take me inside," Palmer whispered, wrapping her thick arms around his broad shoulders, pulling him closer. Valerie lifted his head, his dark eyes blazing with a fierce, unbreakable devotion. He scooped her up into his arms, easily carrying her heavy curves against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. As he carried her away from the carnage and back into the shadows of his fortress, Palmer rested her head against his racing heart, finally surrendering to the golden cage. If you enjoyed this intense, pulse-pounding Mafia romance, make sure to hit that like button to show your support. We love bringing these dramatic, dark romance stories to life for you. Don't forget to share this story with your friends who crave thrilling twists and possessive anti-heroes, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life inspired audio dramas every single week. Drop a comment below with your favorite scene.